I am recording this on a digital dictaphone because my fingers are shaking too violently to type on a keyboard. If you find this audio file, do not come to Iron Creek. Stay away from the fence. Stay away from the perimeter. I used to think a 12-foot steel fence topped with razor wire was enough to keep nature out. I was wrong. The things out here didn't break the fence down. They didn't dig under it. They didn't cut the wire. They walked right through the front gate like they owned the place, mocking our security with their intelligence. I was sitting in the main control booth, staring at the monitors with tired, gritty eyes. It was 3 a.m., the dead hour, when the mind starts to play tricks on you. The rain was hammering against the reinforced glass, blurring the world outside into gray shapes and drowning out the noise of the forest. I took a sip of cold coffee, my hand trembling slightly from too much caffeine, and glanced at camera 4. That camera points directly at the main electronic gate. It's the only way in or out of the logging camp. It requires a 4-digit code to open, a code that changes every week. I saw a shadow standing by the keypad. My first thought was that O'Malley, the other guard, had gone out for a smoke and forgot the code. I leaned into the microphone to yell at him, ready to make a joke about his memory. But then the lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark white light. The figure wasn't O'Malley. It was too tall. It was too thin. And it was pressing the buttons with a long, black finger. Beep, 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 beep. The light turned green. The gate began to slide open, welcoming the nightmare inside with a mechanical hum that sounded like a death knell. Let me back up so you understand why this shouldn't be possible. Iron Creek is a remote logging outpost in northern Canada, miles away from civilization. It is high-tech. We aren't just guys with flashlights walking around in the dark. We are a fortress. The company spent millions on motion sensors, thermal cameras, and hydraulic gates. My job was simple: sit in the warm booth, watch the screens, and make sure nobody stole the heavy machinery. It was supposed to be the easiest money I ever made. It was boring work for the most part. For 6 months, the only thing I saw on the thermal cameras were deer, coyotes, and the occasional bear rummaging for trash. The system works on heat. If something warm moves, a red box appears on the screen around it to alert the guard. It is foolproof technology. Or so I was told during my orientation by a suit who had never spent a night in these woods. But technology only works if the enemy follows the rules of physics. Tonight started like any other night. I relieved the day shift guy, checked the logs, and settled in for the long haul. The camp was empty except for me and O'Malley. The logging crew had gone home for the weekend, leaving the machines silent. It was just us, guarding $50 million worth of equipment. The silence out here is heavy. It presses against your ears and makes you hear things that aren't there. But tonight the silence felt different. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to break, a tension so thick you could choke on it. The trouble started an hour before the gate opened. I was doing my routine scan of the perimeter cameras, toggling through the views. I switched to camera 2, which covers the north tree line where the forest is densest. I saw movement. It was just a flicker, like a gray blur moving between 2 massive pine trees. I waited for the computer to highlight it with a red box, expecting a deer. The red box never appeared. The computer didn't register any heat. I frowned and tapped the screen thinking the monitor was frozen. "Piece of junk," I muttered, frustrated. I assumed it was a glitch or maybe a plastic tarp blowing in the wind. But then I saw it again. The blur moved closer to the fence. It stopped and seemed to look up at the camera, aware of the lens. I zoomed in. The image was grainy, but I could make out a shape. It stood on 2 legs like a man, but its posture was wrong. Its knees bent backward like a dog's, and its arms hung low, almost touching the ground. It stood perfectly still, blending in with the rain, The terrifying part wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't see. The thermal camera showed the trees as warm and living, but the figure? It was cold. It was the same temperature as the dead air around it, like a walking corpse that had crawled out of the frozen earth to watch us. I grabbed the radio, my grip tight. "O'Malley, this is Gordon. I've got a visual on Sector 2. No heat signature. Might be a malfunction, but I need you to check it out." The radio crackled with static before O'Malley's voice came through. He sounded tired and annoyed, probably half asleep in his truck. "It's raining sideways out here, Gordon. Probably just a plastic tarp blowing in the wind. Let it go." O'Malley was an old-timer. He had worked in these woods for 30 years, and he had seen everything. He always told me that technology makes you stupid. He said that if you rely on a screen, you lose your instincts. He believed in the old stories, legends about things that steal voices and wear skins. I always laughed at him. I told him we lived in the age of satellites and drones. I told him ghosts didn't exist, and that he watched too many scary movies. "Just check it, O'Malley," I insisted, feeling a strange chill crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold draft. "It's standing right by the secondary transformer." I heard him sigh, the sound of a man resigning himself to a chore. "Fine, I'm heading there now. Keep an eye on me." I watched on the screen as O'Malley's heat signature, a bright orange blob, moved toward the gray shape. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The orange blob was walking straight toward the cold, invisible danger, and I couldn't do anything to stop him but watch. I watched O'Malley reach the spot where I had seen the figure. He shined his flashlight around, the beam cutting through the rain like a scythe saber. The gray shape was gone. "There's nothing here, Gordon," O'Malley radioed, his voice sounding tinny over the speaker. "Just wet trees and mud. You're seeing things." I stared at the screen. I knew I had seen something. "Look up," I whispered, though I didn't press the button to tell him, afraid to sound crazy. Suddenly, O'Malley stopped moving. The orange heat signature on my screen froze in place. Then the lightning beam jerked upward, aiming into the branches of a tall spruce tree. "What the—" O'Malley's voice cut out abruptly. He didn't scream. He didn't fire his weapon. The radio just clicked off, leaving only dead air and the static hiss of the storm. That's when the panic set in, cold and sharp. I was alone. I locked the heavy steel door of the control booth and pulled out my revolver. I kept my eyes glued to the screens, switching views rapidly. I expected a monster to come crashing through the fence, tearing metal with brute strength. I was ready for a fight against a beast. I was not ready for a chess match against a genius who was always 3 moves ahead. 10 minutes after O'Malley vanished, the lights in the camp flickered, then the motion sensors on the east side went off, then the west side, then the south. It wasn't a random attack. They were testing the perimeter. They were triggering the sensors on purpose to see where the cameras would turn, mapping our blind spots. These weren't animals. Animals don't understand blind spots. Animals don't understand technology. These things had studied us. They knew exactly how our machines worked, and they were using them against us to create openings in our defenses.
We are back to the moment where I started. Camera 4, the main gate. I watched the creature standing at the keypad. It was the leader. It had to be. It stood taller than the others, its fur matted and dark, mixing with the shadows. It looked at the keypad with a calm, terrifying intelligence, like a technician inspecting a machine he had built himself. I saw it extend a finger. It didn't smash the machine. It pressed the buttons gently. 1, 9, 4, 7. That was the code. That was the daily code the foreman used this morning. How could it know? It must have been watching from the tree line all day. It must have seen the foreman's fingers move and memorized the sequence perfectly, digit for digit. The gate began to slide open with a mechanical groan. The creature didn't rush in. It stood there and waited. It turned its head slowly toward my camera. Its eyes were not glowing like wolf's eyes. They were dull and yellow, like old ivory. It curled its lip, revealing teeth that looked too flat to be a predator's, yet too sharp to be human. It smiled. It knew I was watching. It wanted me to see it enter my home, stripping away my last illusion of safety. The leader stepped through the open gate, claiming the territory. Behind him, 3 more shapes emerged from the darkness. They moved on all fours, crawling low to the ground like spiders. They were silent. They entered the compound and spread out with military precision. One headed toward the generator shed, one headed toward the garage. The leader walked straight down the main gravel road toward my control booth, his eyes fixed on my window. I grabbed the emergency phone to call the police. The line was dead. No dial tone. Just a strange clicking sound that echoed in the receiver. I realized then that they hadn't just watched the gate. They had found the phone lines running into the camp. They had cut them before they even entered. They had isolated me completely before firing the first shot. I was trapped. My cell phone had no signal this far north. I was in a glass box, lit up like a fish tank, while monsters roamed the dark outside. I turned off the lights in the booth, plunging myself into darkness. I slid down to the floor, hiding under the desk. I hugged my knees to my chest and listened to the rain, praying that the darkness would be enough to hide me from those yellow eyes that seemed to see everything. The hum of the electricity was the only comforting sound left in the world. Then it stopped. The massive diesel generator that powered the floodlights sputtered and died. The camp plunged into absolute blackness. The monitors on my wall flickered and went dark, turning into useless black mirrors. Now I was blind. I heard a sound from outside. It was the sound of metal tearing and wire snapping. They were destroying the generator. They didn't want the lights coming back on. They preferred the dark. They wanted me to be blind. They wanted to hunt me in an environment where they had the advantage and I was helpless. I held my breath, afraid to make a sound. I could hear them moving on the gravel now. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The footsteps were heavy. They were getting closer to the booth. I gripped the handle of my revolver so tight my knuckles turned white. I had 6 bullets. There were at least 4 of them, but math wasn't on my side. The smell of wet dog and something rotten began to seep through the vents, making me gag and cover my mouth to stop from vomiting. Then came the knock. It wasn't a banging or a scratching. It was a polite, rhythmic knock on the heavy steel door of the booth. Knock, knock, knock. It sounded like a neighbor visiting for sugar. It was so civilized, so human, that it made my blood run cold and my skin crawl. "Gordon?" The voice came from the other side of the door. My heart stopped in my chest. It was O'Malley's voice, but it sounded wrong. It sounded scratchy, like a recording being played on a bad speaker. The cadence was too slow, spacing out the words unnaturally, as if the speaker didn't understand the meaning. "Gordon, open the door. It is safe now." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe O'Malley had escaped and was coming to save me. I reached my hand up toward the lock, desperate for a friend. My fingers brushed the cold metal. "Open. Gordon. Cold. Out. Here." Then I heard a sound that made me pull my hand back like I had touched fire. I heard a wet clicking noise from the throat of the speaker. It sounded like bones grinding together. That wasn't O'Malley.
That was something trying to wear his voice like a mask. "I know you're not O'Malley!" I shouted through the door, my voice cracking with fear. "Go away!" There was a long silence. Then a low, guttural laugh vibrated through the steel door. The voice changed. It wasn't O'Malley anymore. It shifted into a high-pitched, distorted tone, like a child mimicking an adult to be cruel. "Not O'Malley. Not O'Malley." It was mocking me. It was playing with me. I realized then that they didn't just learn codes, they learned us. They listened to our conversations. They learned our names. They were parrots made of nightmares, repeating our last words back to us before we died. They found our fear amusing. Something slammed against the side of the booth. The whole structure shook violently, tilting slightly on its foundation. My coffee cup fell off the desk and shattered on the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling, coating my hair. They were done being polite. They were trying to tip the booth over. They were testing the structural integrity of my little metal coffin, seeing how hard they had to push to break the shell. The glass of the control booth is bulletproof. It is designed to stop a rifle round. But I didn't know if it could stop a 300-pound monster throwing itself against it with supernatural force. I saw a face press against the window above me, flattening its features against the pane. A flash of lightning illuminated it for a split second. It was a hairless, gray face with deep wrinkles. It didn't have a nose, just two slits, and it was pressing its hand against the glass, tracing the seams. It was looking for a weakness. It was looking for the hinges. It studied the frame with a terrifying curiosity, like a scientist examining a specimen in a jar. I fired my gun. Bang! The glass spiderwebbed but didn't shatter. The creature didn't flinch. It just pulled its face back and stared at the spiderweb pattern. It seemed fascinated by the reaction. It wasn't afraid of the noise. It was learning what a gun did. It knew that the glass blocked the danger, so it continued its work, unbothered by my weapon. It knew I couldn't hurt it as long as the glass held, and it knew the glass wouldn't hold forever. I couldn't stay in the booth. It was only a matter of time before they figured out how to pop the door hinges or smash through the roof. I needed to get to the garage. The company trucks were parked there. If I could get to a truck, maybe I could ram through the gate and outrun them on the main road. The garage was 50 yards away. 50 yards of open, dark ground. It felt like 50 miles. I waited for the creature at the window to move away. I heard it climb onto the roof of the booth, its claws scraping against the metal sheets, a screeching sound that set my teeth on edge. It was above me, waiting for me to emerge. This was my chance. If the others were at the generator, I had a small window. I unlocked the door slowly. The mechanism clicked loudly in the silence. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with stale air, kicked the door open, and ran. I knew this was suicidal, but staying in the booth was a guaranteed death sentence. I had to move now or die in a box. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. The rain stung my face like needles, blurring my vision. My boot slipped on the wet gravel, but I kept my balance, fueled by pure adrenaline. I didn't look back. I stared straight at the garage door, willing it to be closer, imagining the safety of the heavy walls. I heard a screech from behind me. It sounded like metal tearing. The creature on the roof had seen me. I heard the heavy thud of it landing on the ground. Then I heard the galloping, 4 legs hitting the mud in a rhythmic beat. It was chasing me. It was gaining on me with every stride, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I reached the garage side door, gasping for air. I fumbled for my keys. My hands were wet and slippery, shaking uncontrollably. Come on, I whispered, panic rising. I could hear the breathing behind me, a wet, rasping sound that was getting louder. I jammed the key into the lock and turned it. The door swung open. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut just as a heavy body crashed against it, shaking the frame and knocking dust loose from the jam. I locked the deadbolt and backed away, my chest heaving. The garage was huge and smelled of diesel and oil, a familiar industrial scent that felt strangely alien now. It was pitch black inside, except for the faint light coming from the high windows. I pulled out my small flashlight and shined it around, the beam cutting through the gloom. 3 pickup trucks were parked in a row. I ran to the nearest one, a white Ford. I tried the door. Locked. The keys were usually kept in a lockbox on the wall. I cursed and ran to the wall. The lockbox was open. It was empty. The hooks where the keys should have been were bare. My blood ran cold. The keys weren't there. I looked at the floor. Scattered on the concrete were the keys. They had been chewed. The plastic fobs were crushed into sharp fragments. The metal shanks were twisted into useless knots. They had been here first. They had disabled the vehicles. They knew we needed these machines to escape, so they took them away from us. They had planned for this exact moment. I stood there in the silence, staring at the ruined keys, feeling hope drain out of me. Why? Why would a predator do this? Wolves killed to eat. Bears killed to protect territory. This was sabotage. This was strategic. They wanted to make sure nobody left Iron Creek alive to tell the tale. Then I heard a sound from the back of the garage, near the mechanic's pit. It was a soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Metal on concrete. I shined my light toward the pit. A pair of eyes reflected the beam. They were low to the ground, glowing green in the darkness. I whispered, "O'Malley?" Hope rising in my chest again, desperate for an ally. The figure stood up slowly. It was wearing O'Malley's jacket. It was wearing his hat, but the jacket was torn, revealing gray fur underneath, and the hat was resting on a head that was too long, too angular. The creature had put on his clothes. It was wearing him like a trophy. It tilted its head, mocking the way a human would stand, enjoying my horror as I realized what it had done to my friend. The creature in O'Malley's clothes let out a low growl that vibrated in my chest. It stood between me and the only exit, blocking my path. I raised my revolver. I didn't hesitate this time. I aimed for the center of the chest and pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 The shots echoed loudly in the enclosed space, deafening me momentarily. The creature jerked back. I hit it. It howled, a sound of pain and fury that sounded too human, and scrambled sideways, hiding behind a stack of tires. It was hurt, but it wasn't dead. The bullet wounds only seemed to make it angrier and faster. I didn't wait to see if it would attack again. I looked for another way out. There was a ventilation duct near the ceiling. It was too high to reach. There was a fire exit on the far wall. I sprinted toward it, my boots pounding on the concrete. The creature behind the tires hissed, but it didn't pursue. It was wary of the gun now. It realized that I still had teeth, so it let me run, knowing there were others waiting outside. I hit the crash bar on the fire exit and burst out into the rain again. I was on the west side of the camp now, near the timber stacks. Huge piles of logs were stacked 20 feet high, creating a maze of wood and shadows. I ran into the maze. I figured the narrow spaces would make it harder for the big ones to follow me. I squeezed between 2 massive piles of cedar logs. The smell of fresh wood was overpowering. It masked the smell of the rain and the blood, giving me a moment of olfactory relief. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against the rough bark. I checked my gun. 2 bullets left. I had wasted 3 in the garage. I was running out of options. I needed a secure place. The only place left was the foreman's office trailer. It had a reinforced door and a landline that might still work if the main line was cut differently. I had to get there before they cut off that route, too. I pushed off the logs and kept moving. I moved through the log piles quietly, stepping carefully on the wet ground. I tried to keep my breathing slow, forcing myself to be calm. Above me, on top of the logs, I heard movement. They were up there. They were jumping from pile to pile, tracking me from above. They were herding me like sheep. I looked up and saw a silhouette against the gray sky. It was looking down at me, crouching like a gargoyle. It didn't attack. It just pointed a long finger toward the east, toward the foreman's trailer. It gestured with a chilling, human-like intent. Why? Why would a predator do this? It wanted me to go there. It was guiding me. A trap? Probably. But I had no choice. I couldn't stay in the maze forever. I gripped my gun and moved toward the exit of the log pile, heading exactly where the monster wanted me to go. I felt like a puppet on a string, dancing to their tune, but I hoped that the trailer offered a way out that they hadn't anticipated. I reached the trailer, my lungs burning. The door was closed. I tried the handle. Unlocked. That was suspicious. Everything else had been locked or destroyed. I pushed the door open with my foot and aimed my gun inside, expecting an ambush, ready to fire my last shots. The office was empty. Papers were scattered on the floor, but the desk was intact. And there, sitting on the desk, was the phone. The receiver was off the hook, dangling by its cord, swaying slightly. I rushed over and picked it up. I listened. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Hello?" A voice answered, a clear human voice. It wasn't the mimic. It was distinct. It sounded like the regional manager, Mr. Henderson. "Gordon, is that you? We got an automated distress signal from the gate system. Are you okay?" The sound of another human voice almost made my knees buckle with relief. I wasn't alone anymore. Help was on the line. I almost cried, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "Mr. Henderson, yes, they're here. The animals, or whatever they are. They killed O'Malley. They cut the power. I'm trapped in the foreman's trailer." "Calm down, son," Henderson said. His voice was steady, reassuring, the voice of authority. "We have a tactical team 2 miles out. They are approaching the main gate now. They can't get in because the power is down. We need you to manually override the perimeter fence so they can drive the armored truck in safely. Do it now, Gordon. Every second counts." I looked at the wall. There was indeed a panel marked Perimeter Control. It had a keypad glowing faintly with backup power. "Okay," I said. "I see it. What's the code?" 8852, Henderson said. "Do it quickly, Gordon. The team says they see movement near your location. They need to get in now to save you." I reached for the keypad. My finger hovered over the 8. "Hurry, Gordon," Henderson urged. "They are coming for you." Something made me pause. It was the tone. Henderson was a man who stuttered when he was nervous. I had known him for years. This voice, it was too smooth. It was too perfect. It lacked the fear that a real person would have in this situation. It sounded rehearsed.
"Mr. Henderson," I said slowly, my hand trembling over the keys, withdrawing my finger. "What did you give me for Christmas last year?" Silence. The line went dead silent. The static hissed in my ear like a snake. "Come on, Gordon," the voice said, a little sharper this time, losing its composure. "This isn't the time for games. Open the fence." "Answer the question," I shouted, gripping the phone tight. The voice on the phone changed. It dropped an octave. It became that grinding, gravelly sound I had heard at the booth. "Open the fence. Meet." I slammed the phone down. It wasn't Henderson. It was them. They had tapped into the local intercom system. They were in the main office. They wanted me to drop the electricity on the fence. Why? Because they couldn't get out. They had trapped themselves in with the high voltage. I stumbled back from the panel, horror washing over me. The gate at the front only opened the driveway. The rest of the camp was surrounded by the electric fence. It was deadly. They could get into the camp through the gate, but they couldn't leave through the forest to get to the town unless the voltage was killed. They weren't trying to eat me. They were using me. I was the only one with thumbs and the knowledge to operate the panel. They had herded me here. They had left the door unlocked. They had mimicked my boss perfectly, all to get me to turn off the electricity so they could expand their hunting ground. I looked out the window of the trailer. They were standing there, dozens of them. They were lined up against the edge of the forest, waiting, watching the red light on the fence, waiting for it to turn green so they could invade the rest of the world. They were an army waiting for the bridge to lower. I smashed the keypad with the butt of my gun. Plastic shattered. Sparks flew. I destroyed the mechanism completely. The fence would stay on. The electricity would keep humming. They would burn if they tried to cross. A roar went up from outside, a sound of pure frustration and rage that shook the trailer walls. They knew I had figured it out. They rushed the trailer. I fired my last 2 shots through the door, but it didn't stop them. The metal buckled under their weight. So here I am. I'm recording this on the foreman's dictaphone. The door is about to give way. I'm not going to make it. But neither are they. The fence is live. They are trapped in here with me. Wait. I hear something. The keypad I smashed. It's beeping. I look down. The wires. They are twisting together. A long black claw is reaching through the hole in the wall. It's stripping the wires. It's connecting the red wire to the blue wire. It watched me destroy it. It learned how the circuit works. The red light on the fence just turned green. They didn't need me to type the code. They just needed me to show them where the wires were. God help us. They are loose, and they are heading south.